Hello, my name is Sarah Jensen, and today I will be addressing the claim that whole grains reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. I will be looking across three articles, and together these articles give us a detailed view of both the statistical evidence and the biological mechanisms behind whole grains and diabetes risk. So first, whole grains are grains that contain the bran, germ, and endosperm. So by contrast, refined grains have the bran and germ removed, which strips away fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So understanding the distinction is crucial because most of the observed health benefits come from the fiber and the nutrient components that only exist if the grain is intact. And when it is intact, it contains high amounts of fiber, antioxidants, and photochemicals. And some common examples of where one could find whole grains is in brown rice, barley and rye, oatmeal and breakfast cereals, and lots of dark breads. Across the research literature, there were numerous claimed benefits of a diet high in whole grain, like reducing fat mass, increasing metabolic rate, promoting a negative energy balance, and most importantly, for type 2 diabetes, um, increasing insulin sensitivity. It also showed reduction in inflammation. So, why these studies matter is because the studies have shown associations between consumption of whole grains and the risk of developing other major chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, which I will be focusing on today, but others include obesity, some types of cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Another reason why these studies are so important is because type 2 diabetes is so common, but it is also preventable. And dietary interventions are usually a primary prevention strategy. So it is common that we would see a food product studied across chronic diseases. And they are often recommended by healthcare professionals, but we will today see how strong that evidence is. Several of the studies included analyzing cohort studies, a meta-analysis, and also randomized control trials. And the main findings were that people with the highest intake of the whole grain had a significantly lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to those with the lowest intakes. So the dose response pattern was common across and ranged from about 20 to 30%, 20% being the low whole grain intake group and 30% being the high. Another compelling piece of evidence was from a Reynolds 2020 study that analyzed people who already had diabetes or were already at some sort of metabolic risk. And they reported that a increase of dietary fiber from 19 to 35 grams per day showed a 35% reduction in all-cause mortality. But one of the most compelling pieces of evidence was the 2020 WHO study, which pooled data from three major US cohorts. And this data set included 4.6 million people. And after a 1 year follow-up, they found less than 19,000 new cases of type 2 diabetes. So this means that there was only a 0.4% finding in diabetes across this 4.6 million population. So some plausible links to addressing why the mechanisms would be working together in an increased diet with whole grains is improved insulin sensitivity and lowering the glycemic load, mostly because of fiber. Whole grains are one of the easiest ways to increase dietary fiber, so these findings sort of reinforce the biological plausibility of the effect seen in the cohort studies. A diet high in whole grains will also increase satiety, so that could also play a role in just overall weight control. There were some limitations that I had observed across this research. The first one being sort of more just on a a personal perspective is that people who will regularly consume whole grains most likely or often will lead healthier lifestyles. So I mean this by saying an increase in dietary whole grain is probably not the only health intervention that they're participating in, and they have sort of a variety of health conscious decisions being made. Another interesting point brought up in one of the studies was that most of the packaged whole grain products that are on the shelves often include an increase of, sugar and fats. I know for myself, especially when I'm baking, sometimes I do swap for a whole grain flour, but it already is included so much, butter or sugar that I often don't even make the swap because I view that as more of a treat. Getting back to the studies, major dietary and diabetes studies are just observational, meaning that there's a number of unmeasured lifestyle factors that, could play a role in influencing the results. Another distinction between the articles was they had different definitions of whole grain and serving sizes. Still, the consistency of these results across multiple cohorts and populations and food types did strengthen the evidence of the association. So I do believe that the evidence strongly supports the claim that increasing whole grain intake is associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. The largest study showed a 29% lower risk that was supported by similar reductions across multiple reviews.